Welcome to the deep dive. We take the stuff you're curious about, dig into the sources, and try to pull out the key knowledge, quickly but thoroughly.
Yeah, get right to the heart of it.
Exactly. So today, we're diving into something that really made a splash. Freakonomics. We've got some key excerpts you sent over.
Right, the Levitt and Dubner book.
That's the one. And the whole idea, it's fascinating, isn't it? Using economics to look at, well, everything. How the world actually works, not just how we think it does.
Or how the experts say it works sometimes. It often challenges that conventional wisdom.
Totally. And these excerpts you shared, it covers such a wild range of topics. It's not just, supply and demand curves.
No, not at all. It's about digging into data on things that seem totally unrelated at first glance, asking those slightly weird questions.
Like why drug dealers might live with their moms, or the whole guns versus swimming pools thing, which is more dangerous.
Or naming your kid. Does that actually matter for their future? It's that kind of unexpected angle.
So our mission here is basically to pull out some of those really juicy, counterintuitive insights, those aha moments, challenge some assumptions, but without getting bogged down.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start? Maybe with the core idea.
Yeah, let's do that. The book really hammers home this idea of incentives. It's kind of central to their whole way of thinking.
It really is. Economics, from their perspective, is basically the study of incentives, how people get what they want or need.
Especially when other people want the same thing, right?
Exactly. And economists are, well, kind of obsessed with them. They see them as these little levers or keys that explain why people do what they do.
And they're not always obvious, are they? That's the key thing.
Not at all. Which brings us to that classic example from the book, The Israeli Daycare Center.
Oh, yeah, the late parents. That's such a good one. Walk us through it.
Okay, so the daycare had this problem, right? Parents showing up late to pick up their kids. Annoying for the staff.
Standard problem. So they thought, okay, let's hit them where it hurts the wallet. They introduced a fine for late pickups.
Seemed logical. An economic disincentive. Make it costly. People will stop doing it.
But that's not what happened, is it?
Nope. The opposite. Late pickups actually increased. Doubled, I think the book said.
Crazy. Why?
Well, the theory is the fine changed the whole dynamic. Before, being late was like a moral thing. You felt guilty for inconveniencing the teachers.
A social pressure.
Right. But once the fine came in, it just became a transaction. Parents could basically buy the right to be late. The guilt factor, poof, gone.
So the financial incentive crowded out the moral or social one. That's fascinating.
It really shows you have to think about the type of incentive. It's not just about money.
Right. The book mentions different kinds. There are the obvious economic ones like, lose your job if you steal.
And moral ones, just not wanting to do the wrong thing, your conscience.
And social ones like not picking your nose in public because people will think you're gross. Fear of shame.
Yeah. And these all interact, sometimes in really unexpected ways.
Which leads to what they call perverse incentives, like the daycare fine, where the incentive actually encourages the behavior you don't want.
Precisely. It's a great illustration.
Mm-hmm.
Designing good incentives is trickier than it looks. You got to anticipate how people will really react.
Okay, so incentives are key.
Yeah.
What's another big theme from these excerpts? Cheating comes up a lot.
It does. And they frame it in a really interesting way as a primordial economic act. Meaning it's kind of fundamental. It's about getting more for less effort, right? Bypassing the rules to maximize your gain. It's rational in a purely economic sense, even if it's wrong.
A shortcut.
Exactly. And they look at some amazing examples. School teachers, for instance.
Yes, the high-stakes testing. That was eye-opening. How did they figure that out?
Well, think about the pressure. Things like No Child Left Behind, policies in Chicago. Suddenly, test scores weren't just about the kids, they were about the teachers' careers, the school's funding.
Huge incentives to boost those scores.
Massive. So Levitt and his team, they didn't just guess. They built these algorithms to sift through tons of test data.
Looking for suspicious patterns.
Exactly. Like a bunch of kids in one class suddenly getting the exact same string of answers right on really hard questions. Or kids doing great on hard stuff, but bombing easy stuff. Statistically really unlikely.
Stuff that screams not quite right.
Right. Or seeing these huge jumps in a class's scores one year and then they plummet the next year after the teacher moves on. That suggests manipulation, not real learning.
And did they have a theory on how the teachers were doing it?
The likely method, they figured, was subtly changing answers. Maybe erasing wrong bubbles and filling in the right ones on a few papers, focusing on the tricky questions to get the most bang for their buck. Not every kid, not every question, just enough to nudge the average up.
Sneaky. And what happened when they found this in Chicago?
The guy in charge then, Arne Duncan, he took it seriously. They double-checked, compared the flagged classes to others. The kids of suspected cheaters did way worse on later independent tests.
So the scores were inflated.
Seems so. And the result? They started firing the teachers they identified.
Wow. Did that actually stop the cheating?
It had a big impact. The next year, cheating dropped by something like 30%. It showed that accountability, the fear of getting caught, was a really powerful counterincentive.
Makes sense. Fear is a strong motivator.
And interestingly, the same kind of analysis could also pick out the really good teachers, the ones whose students showed steady, real improvement.
So data cuts both ways, okay, from teachers to sumo wrestlers. That seems like a jump.
It does, but the underlying theme is the same. Incentives driving behavior, even corruption.
How does it work in sumo? Isn't it all tradition and honor?
On the surface, maybe. But underneath, there's this incredibly intense ranking system. Your rank determines everything: money, status, privileges, how you live day to day.
So huge pressure to climb the ranks, or at least not fall.
Exactly. Especially around that make or break point. Imagine it's the last day of the big tournament. You're a wrestler with a 7-7 record. One more win gets you a winning record, keeps your rank safe, maybe improves it.
High stakes for that guy.
Very. Now, say your opponent is already 8-6. He's got his winning record. For him, winning or losing this last match doesn't change much, but for the 7-7 guy, it's huge.
I see where this is going. An incentive for the 8-6 guy to maybe not try his hardest.
Or to intentionally lose, throw the match. The gain for the 7-7 wrestler is massive compared to the minor loss for the 8-6 guy.
So how did they test this with data?
They crunched the numbers on exactly those matches.
Right.
7-7 versus 8-6 on the final day. And guess what?
The 7-7 guy won way more often than he should have.
Bingo. Something like 80% of the time. Way higher than their normal win rate against similar opponents would predict. Statistically, it smelled fishy.
Suggests matches were being rigged.
Strongly suggests it. And what's really telling is what happened when the media started reporting on match-fixing scandals.
The spotlight effect.
Yeah. Suddenly, there was a disincentive to cheat public scrutiny, potential punishment. And in the tournaments, right after those scandals broke, that 80% win rate for the 7-7 guys, it dropped sharply, down near 50%. Much closer to what you'd expect if it was legit.
Wow. The data really tells a story there.
It does. And they even found skewed results in matches involving wrestlers not named in the scandals, suggesting it might have been pretty widespread.
Okay, so incentives can corrupt even sacred traditions. Let's shift to something more mundane, maybe. The bagel guy, Paul Feldman.
Ah, yes, the office bagel data. This is brilliant in its simplicity.
So this guy, he ran a business delivering bagels and donuts to offices.
Yeah, but instead of collecting money up front, he just left the bagels in a cash box. Pure honor system.
They kept records.
Meticulous records for years. Which companies paid, how much, on which days. It became this accidental study of everyday honesty.
What did he find? Were people generally honest?
Mostly, yeah. The overall payment rate was around 87%. He even had categories for honest companies that paid over 90% consistently.
But 13% didn't pay. That's still quite a bit.
It is. And what's interesting is what they call the nuanced social calculus of theft. People would take a bagel without paying.
But they almost never stole the whole money box.
Exactly. Stealing a bagel feels different from stealing cash, apparently, even though economically it's still theft.
Were there patterns? Did anything affect the honesty rates?
Oh, yeah. Size of the office mattered. Smaller offices were more honest. Maybe more shame or accountability, like how street crime often correlates with anonymity.
Makes sense. What else?
Weather, surprisingly. People paid more when the weather was nice. Bad weather, less payment.
Weird. What about holidays?
Honesty dipped around stressful holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving, maybe financial pressure. But holidays that were just a day off, like July 4th, payment rates went up.
Huh. People feeling more relaxed, maybe?
Could be. And there was a really noticeable spike in honesty right after 9/11.
Really? Why?
Maybe a surge in patriotism or empathy, a sense of community. It didn't last forever, but it was a clear jump in the data.
So overall, his data suggests most people are basically honest, even when no one's watching, like Glaucon's Ring of Gyges question.
Feldman's data kind of suggests, yeah, most people are honest most of the time, even without the threat of being caught. It's quite optimistic in a way.
Fascinating. Okay, moving on. The book also talks a lot about information asymmetry. Experts having knowledge we don't.
Right, that imbalance of information. And the key point is that experts, like everyone else, respond to their incentives. And that can affect the information they give us.
And we need to be aware of that conflict of interest, potentially.
Definitely. The real estate agent example is perfect.
Explain that one.
Okay, they looked at data comparing how agents sell their own houses versus how they sell houses for clients.
What's the difference?
Agents tend to leave their own homes on the market longer, and they sell them for more money, about 3% higher on average.
Why would they do that?
Incentives. For their own house, they get the full benefit of that extra 3%. But for a client's house, holding out for that extra 3% only nets the agent a tiny bit more commission. It's often not worth their time compared to just closing the deal quickly and moving on to the next one.
So they're incentivized for speed and volume with clients, but maximizing price for themselves.
Pretty much. Their financial incentive isn't perfectly aligned with the client's.
And they used like coded language in listings too.
Yeah, the book mentions things like, well-maintained. Sounds good, right? But it might actually mean it's old, but nothing's actually broken yet. It's managing information.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, how does this connect to the Ku Klux Klan? That seems like another huge leap.
It's about the power of secret information. A lot of the KKK's power, their mystique and fear factor, came from their secrecy, their rituals, their codes, their hierarchy. Nobody outside knew the details.
Information asymmetry gave them power.
Exactly. Then this guy, Stetson Kennedy, he infiltrated the Klan, learned all their secrets.
And what did he do with them?
He gave them to the producers of the Adventures of Superman radio show.
No way. Superman fought the Klan on the radio.
He did. They used the actual Klan rituals and code words in the show. Suddenly, all these secret, scary things were being broadcast to millions, incorporated into kids' entertainment. It completely demystified the Klan, made them seem kind of ridiculous.
Took away their power by exposing their secrets.
Right. It stripped away the advantage of their secret knowledge, turned their mystique into mockery. Hugely damaging for them.
So information is power, and sharing information can dismantle that power.
That's the idea. They connect it to things like online press comparison sites for insurance. Makes it harder for companies to charge wildly different prices because the information is out there. Transparency.
Like that quote, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Justice Brandeis. Exactly. They also mention corporate scandals like Enron, classic cases of experts hiding or twisting information for their own gain. Sins of information, they call it.
And even online dating fits this pattern.
Oh, definitely. Think about it. Your profile. That's you presenting information, often strategically. What you choose to highlight, what you might exaggerate.
Like everyone claiming to be above average looking.
Exactly. The data shows that. And response rates show what people really value versus what they say they value. It's all about managing information to get a desired outcome. Looks, income, intentions, lots of potential for, let's say, strategic presentation.
Okay, so watch out for information asymmetry. Another big theme is challenging conventional wisdom.
Yes, they lean heavily on John Kenneth Galbraith's idea here.
What was his take? Why do we stick to ideas that might not even be true?
Galbraith argued that conventional wisdom sticks around because it's, well, comfortable. It's simple, easy to grasp, fits with what we already think, makes us feel okay.
It's reassuring, even if it's wrong.
Exactly. Actually, questioning it takes effort. It can be unsettling, so we often just go along with the familiar story.
And experts can actually create false conventional wisdom. The book mentions the homelessness stats.
Right. Mitch Snyder, the advocate in the 80s, he famously claimed there were like 3 million homeless people in the U.S., huge number, got tons of attention.
But it wasn't accurate.
He later admitted he basically made it up, just plucked a number out of the air because he felt the issue needed a big, shocking statistic. The book notes similar things can happen with stats on other sensitive issues, like rape incidents, where advocates might inflate numbers, perhaps with good intentions, but still create a misleading picture.
Wow. So even experts aren't immune to creating or spreading misinformation.
Definitely not. Which brings us to maybe the most controversial part of the book, the explanation for the big crime drop in the 1990s.
Right. Everyone was predicting the opposite, weren't they? Like a wave of super predators.
Yeah, the fear was intense in the early 90s. Experts were forecasting doom and gloom, but then crime just plummeted unexpectedly, dramatically.
So why did it happen? Freakonomics goes through a lot of the usual explanations and kind of dismisses them.
Pretty much. They argue against several common theories being the main cause.
Like the booming 90s economy.
Helped a bit, probably, but not the primary driver, they argue.
What about gun control? The Brady Act.
They say largely ineffective because of the huge black market for guns. They point to places like Switzerland, lots of guns, low crime, suggesting the link isn't simple.
Innovative policing, like in New York City.
Important, but the crime drop in NYC actually started before Giuliani and Bratton really got going with their big changes.
More police on the streets.
Correlation, maybe, but hard to prove direct causation for the whole drop.
More prisons.
Yeah.
Locking more people up.
Had an effect, sure. Incapacitation works. But again, not the whole story, according to their analysis.
Capital punishment.
Too rare, too slow to be a major deterrent, they argue. The odds of being executed were tiny compared to, say, the odds of a drug dealer dying on the street.
Okay, so if it wasn't those things primarily, what did cause the drop, according to Levitt and Dubner?
They point to a couple of big, less comfortable factors. First, the bursting of the crack cocaine bubble.
How did that lower crime?
Well, the crack epidemic in the 80s fueled a massive spike in violence, especially among dealers fighting over territory. By the early 90s, the market kind of crashed, profits dropped, many original dealers were dead or in jail, and younger people saw it wasn't worth the risk anymore.
So, less drug war violence.
Exactly. Less violence associated with the crack trade. They estimate this accounted for maybe 15% of the drop. And you saw homicide rates for young black men who were hit hardest by crack fall dramatically.
Okay, that makes sense. What was the other major factor they proposed, the really controversial one?
Right. Legalized abortion.
Okay, explain the logic there, because that one caused a huge stir.
The argument, and it's purely an economic and statistical one they present, is that Roe v. Wade in 1973 led to fewer unwanted children being born in the subsequent year.
And the link to crime.
The logic continues. Research suggests that children born into situations where they are unwanted are statistically more likely, on average, to have difficult upbringings, less support, less stability, maybe worse parenting, which correlates with a higher likelihood of turning to crime later in life.
So fewer unwanted births in the 70s meant fewer potential criminals hitting their peak crime years in the 90s.
That's the core of the theory. Fewer individuals in that high-risk pool 20 years down the line.
What evidence did they offer for this? It sounds explosive.
It was, and remains, very controversial. They pointed to correlations. States with higher abortion rates in the 70s tended to see bigger crime drops in the 90s. They also cited studies from other countries where changes in abortion access seemed to correlate with later changes in crime rates for those age cohorts. And the timing fits the crime drop really took off when that first post-Roe generation reached their late teens and early 20s.
They're very careful to say it's correlation, but the pattern was strong.
They argue the correlation holds up even when controlling for lots of other factors. But yeah, it's ethically incredibly charged. They even do this sort of uncomfortable thought experiment comparing the value of preventing births versus preventing crimes, just to frame the potential scale, while acknowledging the deep moral issues.
Definitely a theory that makes you think, regardless of where you stand on the ethics. Okay, let's shift again. Parenting. What makes a perfect parent? Another area where they challenge assumptions.
Massively. They start by pointing out how much conflicting advice parents get and how bad we all are generally at judging risk. Because parents often focus intense energy and money on things that might not actually make a huge difference, driven by fear or marketing, while maybe overlooking simpler, more impactful things. Which leads them to ask, how much do parenting techniques actually matter compared to just who the parents are?
Okay, and they looked at data for this too, that ECLS study.
Yeah, the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study. Huge data set tracking thousands of kids from kindergarten. They looked at what factors correlated with kids' test scores at the start of school.
And what mattered?
Things that correlated positively with higher scores included parents' education level, socioeconomic status, mom being 30 or older at first birth, parents speaking English at home, lots of books in the house, being involved in the PTA also correlated.
Okay, mostly factors about the parents' background and resources. What didn't seem to matter for those early test scores?
This is the surprising list. Things that showed little or no correlation included mom not working before kindergarten, the child attending Head Start, going to fancy preschools, being taken to museums regularly, even being spanked regularly.
Wow, so all that effort taking kids to museums might not boost their kindergarten test scores.
According to this data, not significantly. Now, crucial caveat, Correlation isn't causation. Maybe parents who read a lot also do other things. But it challenges the idea that specific actions are the main driver, at least for these early scores.
It points more towards the parents' inherent traits and circumstances.
That seems to be the implication. They mention Roland Fryer's research, too, showing the black-white test score gap largely disappears at school entry if you control for parental income, education, and mother's age at first birth. Suggests socioeconomic factors are huge drivers of that initial gap.
So parenting style might be overrated compared to parental background, at least initially.
That's the provocative suggestion for early school performance. But then they bring in Bruce Sacerdote's adoption studies.
What did those show? A different picture.
Kind of. He found that adopted kids' school performance tracked more closely with their biological parents, suggesting genetics play a big role there. However, when looking at adult outcomes like going to college, job quality, marriage age, the adoptive parents' advantages did make a big positive difference.
So parents do matter significantly, just maybe more for long-term outcomes and life trajectory than for those initial test scores.
That seems to be the more nuanced conclusion. Who parents are matters early on, but what parents do and provide seems to shape the long run significantly.
Okay, that makes more sense. Finally, the last topic, names. Does naming your kid Juniper or Jason actually change their life?
Another classic Freakonomics question. Do names cause outcomes or just reflect the parent's background?
What do they find? Do kids with, say, distinctively black names have worse outcomes because of the name?
They found a correlation, yes. Kids with names like Deshaun or Imani, on average, do tend to have worse life outcomes than kids named, say, Jake or Emily. But, and this is the crucial part, they argue the name isn't the cause.
It's an indicator.
Exactly. It's an indicator of the parent's socioeconomic background, education level, cultural context. Parents who choose those names often come from backgrounds with fewer resources and opportunities. So a Deshaun Williams and a Jake Williams born into the exact same circumstances would likely have very similar outcomes. The name is a signal of the starting point, not the determinant of the finish line.
So changing your name wouldn't magically fix things.
Probably not. They argue someone motivated enough to change their name is likely already driven, and that motivation is what leads to better outcomes, not the name itself.
But names do signal things about the parents, like aspirations.
Oh, for sure. You see trends. People naming kids Harvard or Princeton, and they analyze name data from California, showing clear differences in name choices based on parental income and education. High-income parents tend to choose different names than low-income parents.
Like certain names become popular in one group and then filter down.
Yeah, sometimes. Or names that were once common become associated with lower socioeconomic status over time, like they mentioned Cindy or Brenda. It shows how names reflect cultural and class currents.
So the bottom line on names.
Parents put a lot of thought into it, often trying to signal something positive, but ultimately the name itself probably makes very little difference to the child's success compared to the actual circumstances and opportunities the parents provide.
It's more about the parents than the label.
Seems to be the case.
Okay, wow. That's a lot of ground covered.
Yeah.
So wrapping up this deep dive into these Freakonomics bits, what are the main takeaways?
I think it really boils down to a few core ideas. First, the incredible, sometimes hidden power of incentives. They shape so much of our behavior.
Often in ways we don't expect, like the daycare or the sumo wrestlers.
Right. Second, the power of data to uncover those hidden realities and seriously challenge conventional wisdom. Don't just accept what everyone assumes is true.
Even when it comes from experts. Question the source, question the incentives.
Definitely. And third, just how complex the factors are that shape big outcomes, like crime rates or a child's future. It's rarely the simple story we're told. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, like the abortion discussion.
It really pushes you to look at the world differently, doesn't it? Ask those unconventional questions, follow the data, even if it leads somewhere weird.
That's the whole Freakonomics ethos, isn't it? Looking at the hidden side of everything. It's about finding those surprising connections.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about the conventional wisdom you hear every day, at work, in the news, from friends. What are the underlying incentives? Is there data that might tell a different story?
Yeah, start looking for that hidden side. Adopting that kind of questioning perspective, it can actually be really empowering. Helps you see things more clearly, maybe make better decisions.
See the world with fresh eyes? Great place to leave it.